Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining the session today. This is Rita Chui from Asia HRM and Asia HR Women Club. Asia HRM is an international organization for human resources practitioners to stay ahead of the curve, keep abreast of latest information trends and best practices. We do have webinars on different HR topics, and we also have networking platform on social media. We also have paid HR program. As for Asia HR Women Club, literally is a club for HR women in Asia, with our focus on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as we know that DEI has becoming important in recent years, especially for Gen Z, right? Gen Z love working for company, fostering inclusive culture. In order to get talents working for us, we love to, a lot of companies has started adopting DEI, especially inclusive culture in the organization. And that's why for us, we love to have to keep our members abreast of the knowledge on DEI. That's why we have the topic related to DEI. And for Steph, the speaker, she is the expert in DEI. And I would love her to introduce herself later. And she has 14 years of experience in DEI and also a director for gay games in Hong Kong. So without further ado, I would love to pass the control to Steph. But before that, Steph would love to have an interactive discussion with every one of you. If you come across with any questions, you just raise your hand and then just write your question on the chat box, or you can simply, Steph will invite you to speak up your question. Okay, so just enjoy the session. I'm sure you'll learn a lot from her. So Steph, over to you.
Okay, thanks Rita, and hi everyone. So thanks for joining today's session. And as Rita mentioned, really want the session to be interactive. One of the things I think about and I know I'm speaking to a group of HR professionals as well, so a lot of this is probably going to hear a lot of overlap in the way that you business partner and just the way you communicate and influence with your stakeholders. So I'm sure there's going to be strategies that you guys already use in your day-to-day as well that could be relevant here and vice versa. The only thing that's, I guess, more specific to this topic is just when we talk about the content around DE&I specifically, but that to say, I think all your experiences in relation to partnering and working with the business and just speaking to people, that's all still relevant in this situation. So I'm gonna talk us through the topic. So this is essentially wanted to do a session where interactive session where we talk about, I won't say the challenges usually associated with talking about DE&I, because it's such a broad topic and it's not, and this is wide, I want to say it's widely spoken about, but not always widely understood very well. So that also means that in the media, you read a lot about news, social media, in just pop culture as well. So there's a lot of things that get spoken about that relate to DE&I, but because it's in all facets, it's applicable in all facets of life, sometimes it's hard to tie it together and people will form their own different impressions as well. So I think in this context, we're really going to be talking about how do we talk about DE&I from an organizational context in terms of how do you bring it up in the workplace, how do you get support for this, and how do you anticipate and deal with resistance going through some of these things as well. We can always take it outside of the organizational conversation, especially in the questions or the comments that you may have, but just for the purposes of structuring the slides in front of you, that's just how I've structured it today. So, okay. All right. So just a quick recap on what I said earlier around what to anticipate for today's session. Okay, so I know Rita talked about introduction, so I'm just going to share a little bit about myself. I've picked 4 pictures here. You see, and you can assume certain things about me already when you see these pictures. One is that I do have pets. I love animals. I have 2 dogs currently living with me in Hong Kong. I'm a fan of video games. If you see the old school Pac-Man thing up there, I do love very retro and vintage video games as well. As mentioned, Rita mentioned Gay Games. So I've also volunteered as part of the Gay Games committee back then, looking after DE&I and advising on that. And on the last picture here, so I know we have a few Malaysians in this group. So if you've been to Kuching, hopefully you recognize this picture. So this is just a picture of my hometown. So I'm from Kuching in Sarawak, East Malaysia, and this is just a picture of a famous cat statue that we have. So this is just a little bit about myself. I came to Hong Kong back in 2016. Originally grew up in Malaysia before I moved over to Australia to do further studies, coming back to then KL to work before moving over to Hong Kong. All right. So first question I guess I wanted us to discuss today was, what are some of the common roadblocks that people may encounter when it comes to looking for support for DE and IS, especially when it comes to internally in the office. But this can also apply to just, for example, conversations with family members or friends. Sometimes these topics still come up. And so I've broken it down to what are some of the challenges that we may face from individuals, right? Not groups of people, but from individual levels. So what are some of the common phrases that we may sometimes hear from our stakeholders? Maybe, oh yeah, it's, I think, yeah, you're right, it's important, but I don't have enough time. I'm already doing so many things on day to day. I have to worry about all these other things. I just don't have enough time to do the DEI stuff. Or sometimes you may hear things around, yeah, okay, I don't want to be the diverse hire. For example, I want to know that I don't want to be hired because I was a woman. I want to be hired because I'm good and qualified for the job, for example. Sometimes you may also hear comments such as, it's tricky. I don't know where to start. I don't want to offend anybody, so therefore I don't know what's the right thing to say. It's safer if I don't say anything at all. Or sometimes you also hear things around, well, there's so many things out there. I just kind of don't know where to start. I think I want to try, but once I study a little bit about this, I suddenly realized there's so much more that I don't know. For example, I think when I first started looking into persons with disabilities and neurodiversity, and then kind of going, oh, this is not one similar group. There's very many different situations and conditions in here, and each of them require kind of different support. How do I kind of go about starting this now? And I kind of get lost in the information that comes. Or sometimes you'll hear people say, I think we're going a bit too far, right? Isn't it just kind of reverse discrimination? Now it's so hard to be a man and try to find a job, for example, trying to get into that next senior level. Sometimes you may hear these comments as well. Or one I very often hear is when it comes to International Women's Day, you always sometimes get the comment, oh, isn't there going to be a Men's Day, for example? Oh, I don't think we need to do this. Other times, especially I think when it comes to hiring, and it comes to hiring quotas, they'll go well, okay, it's not about promoting the best talent or finding the best talent. Now it's about hiring the most diverse talent that we can find. Oh, I'm under pressure to try to find a female. I'm under pressure to try to find someone from this background to fill this position, for example. So these is not a fully exhaustive list. I'm sure some of you have come across other comments as well before. So I just kind of wanted to, but this is just I want to say this is a snapshot of what are some more common ones that I hear quite often. And behind each of these comments, it's important for us to try to understand what is it that they're trying to say with these comments, rather than take it at face value to say, okay, this person doesn't get it, or this person is now a terrible person. They don't, especially sometimes I think when I work with leaders especially, and I have a higher standards or higher expectations of leaders as well, someone who's more senior, to kind of really try to get it. And sometimes when they don't say what I hope that they say, and I hear some of these comments, it impacts my own judgment of the person. And that's something I'm trying very hard not to do most of the times, and I have to remember that. But I wanted to kind of just pause here and see, does anyone have any comments or anything they wanted, any other statements that they may hear that they wanted to add to this list, you can either put it in you can type it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and share as well. I'm going to practice a thing where I just sit with silence for a little bit. I'm sure Rita is familiar with this from a coaching technique. But it's okay if no one wants to share just yet. But I'm just going to give it a bit more silence first. Okay, that's all right. One of the things then you see these things that we highlighted in red. This represents most of all sometimes the insecurity or the concerns that someone is really trying to express, but they don't know how to say when they are confronted with the topic about DE and I. And it can't, again, this is not everything that's listed down, but this is, I think, representative of most of the ones I've come across before, which is, especially for a topic like DEI, if we talk about we look at the one that says there's a fear of not being able to please everyone, especially on a topic like this, which is meant to be inclusive, and you're trying to think of for everybody and trying to have a message that is, I want to say, that pleases most people. One thing I will say is that because the topic itself is still evolving and general understanding levels as people are still discovering things, isn't going to be impossible to please everybody. That's for sure. Everyone's got their own experiences, ourselves as well, and not everyone's going to have had a positive experience for something that was maybe well intended, and it's okay if that is the case. Just wanted to put it very clear up front, like most things in HR, you're not able to please, a decision can't please everybody. So that's just important to remember, to take away that sort of pressure that you have as well. But I think what's more important for us to remember on the topic is when we're dealing with minority groups or historically excluded groups, it's recognizing that there are also there's not just one way of being that person in that group. Someone from that group may agree with what you're saying, and somebody else from the same group may not. And that's still okay, because that's still representative of the diversity in there. What's important is just that we engage with that group authentically and try to get as many points of view and as much feedback as we can before we make a decision or we make a statement of what we want to put out there. Another thing I wanted to point out also is insecurity, or there's a strong sense for people who may come from majority groups or people that have benefited from the current situation or that have made it to the top in the current space. And there's a fear that working on DEI is going to change things for them. And it's, they may fear losing opportunity. They may fear being treated now no longer having that advantage, if you will. And sometimes that's something that may also touch on the ego a little bit more, to kind of question themselves, oh, does that mean that I didn't deserve where I am today? That means that I didn't put in the hard work that I've put through is not being recognized because of all this effort and all this conversation on DE and I. So it's important to also navigate that space and just be mindful and, I want to say, observant to what someone is feeling and what someone may be going through when they're expressing these sort of opinions. Another one so there's also a very common fear of making mistakes, lack of understanding about DE&I and the benefits of it, or some misconceptions. Another one I wanted to call out is around the tokenism piece, because sometimes we hear people say this, like, oh, I don't want to be hired. Don't pick me because I'm different. Pick me because I'm qualified. And you also hear that sometimes from both the candidate, or sometimes you also hear it from the hiring person or the leader who's making that decision as well. And it's different when it comes from both. But when it comes from the candidate, from the person, just remember there is also sometimes a strong fear of being perceived to not being deserving of the promotion or the opportunities, the fear of being perceived favoritism, and also more importantly, to assess, is there a lack of credibility from the organization that is trying to do this? And all well, good intentions, but sometimes it's a sense of, okay, we are just doing this to tick the box, and we don't really feel the culture change internally as well. And recognizing that whilst change happens slowly and all across, and sometimes hearing this kind of things can hurt and doesn't help the support that we've gathered, but just to be able to sit with it and recognize that this again comes from a place of, this is how they've been able to survive. They just don't want to be picked on, and they want to be seen as, I deserve this promotion, or I am absolutely qualified to be here. And that's some of the aspects. We'll link back to the communication tips that will go down later. I just wanted to bring this up to also sometimes say that sometimes the people that we intend to benefit from the E&I may feel singled out and may feel uncomfortable benefiting from it so directly. Okay, just gonna double check. Okay, no comments, questions. I'm gonna move on to the next slide. So what are some of the other common challenges you may face on an organizational level? So for whoever's already been doing this, I'm sure you're gonna recognize some of this. One is that very often leaders just want the simple answer. Just do one thing that's gonna help fix everything. I'm sure you feel this also on other HR aspects, whether or not it's learning and development or whether or not it's hiring. That's still the very simple thing. Leaders are impatient for a cure-all answer. Second, the other one is very often, and when you speak to employees as well, there is impatience and a strong desire to see accountability being taken immediately, whether or not that's by the organization or by leaders. Because when you start talking about DE&I, you start talking about transparency, it's going to surface, if you're doing it correctly, you should also be surfacing a lot of feedback, or sometimes very loud feedback, some very loud comments to say, well, this leader has acted in this way. I've heard them say this in a meeting before. That's unacceptable. What are you going to be doing about it, for example? So they want to see accountability and behavior change immediately from the organization and from leaders, which also, whilst great to see that, it's also another, I would say, dynamic to be able to expect and just manage. Because very often when you also start having employee resource groups that are more, that have really gone more, that are more mature and have a lot of, I would say, awareness and understanding of the topic, very often they've been some of the more, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but very often they've been my more challenging customers, if you will, because they can be very vocal. They can hold you very tightly to when you say you're going to do something and it takes longer or things get in the way. They do call you out. So that's just something to recognize and sit with, to understand that we are going to be managing that dynamic between leaders who want a simple cure-all and employees who want to see change immediately. All right. Scarcity of resources. So this just refers to budget, headcount, attention span, and capacity for the organization to be able to respond and work on DE&I, whether or not that's programming or supporting specific community groups or doing internal events. And one other thing that is going to be impacting that is potentially an unfavorable industry or political climate. So in today's world, I would say for DEI, the big one is obviously the current backlash that DEI is facing in the US, which may have an impact on American-based, American headquartered MNCs that some of us may be working for. In some cases, it may not affect that at all. In more local, I suppose, in more Asia context, we could be talking, for example, about Malaysia, we could be talking about Singapore, we could be talking about Hong Kong or China, and what the political climate is supportive and maybe less supportive of at the time being. So, all right. Before I move on, I just wanted to see if anybody wanted to add to this list as well, or any comments they wanted to make. I'm gonna stay quiet for about 60 seconds for that. All right. So Reginald, thank you for leaving the comment. Let me just see. So I'm new to Hong Kong and currently job searching. I've heard from people that I shouldn't talk about my ethnic minority status on LinkedIn, as it may discourage employers who would otherwise hire me. I didn't understand this feedback because I feel it's not something I could hide anyway. Thanks, Reginald, for sharing. Let's see. I feel that may be well-intentioned comments, but I'm glad that you feel like you don't want, or you don't need, or you should be hiding it. We can definitely talk about it a little bit further in the comments. But I think this is also just a good example from. Actually, there's something more to the Hong Kong. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Meherans also shared conflicting priorities at organizational level, focusing on productivity over people. Yep, definitely. But I think in this case, hopefully done well, DI should improve productivity. But I want to be very careful about the words that get used, which could be used to also weaponize, for example, the term resilience, well-being, as a way to say people should kind of move on and focus on the job. Come there. Hey.
Hi, Steph. Hey, thanks so much once again. Helmi here from Malaysia.
Hey, Helmi.
This is quite interesting topic, and actually is currently what we call activated in Malaysia for our plant in Johor, JDE, Yakudo Effort. So yeah, I can see that when you mentioned about the scarcity of resources, I can relates to that. Yeah, and I'm just to share with you guys that we are really happy to see that most of our population are quite balanced in terms of gender, and in terms of even the pay itself for women and gents, men, it's quite equivalent. So that is what we are embraced from the global perspective towards to the local perspective plan for Malaysia. So yeah, I foresee that, and of course we do have also challenge with the government in terms of the restriction so-called to embrace this, but we have a different point of view where it's not necessary for that particular things that to be embraced, but we have another avenues, for example, like the gender, the equalities in terms of inclusive of everybody who have to what do we call, have the equal opportunity in that sense. So speaking on the hiring for our organization, we accept whoever, regardless if you are, let's say, female who are currently on what do we call pregnant. We don't disgrace or we don't disqualify this, as long as you have the ability, the skill set that's required for that particular position, that we are okay to that. So this is how that we inculcate for our local plant perspective. So I think that we should be open in terms of that, because we should give the opportunity and equality to everyone, whoever deserve for that place, I would say. Yeah, so this is the thing that currently happening in JDE, just to share, to mention in our organization, that we really embrace to that. Not saying that we are, towards, that's very sensitive issues in Malaysia especially, but these are the things that we can support when it comes to equality or D&I per se. Yeah, just share on it. Yeah.
I love that. Thanks for coming on to share that verbally, Helmi. So really appreciate that. I think it's important, as you point, to recognize to start somewhere, right? And especially I think when it's relevant to the local community, and it's also relevant to the local context, and being mindful of the regulations around that. I know, coming from Malaysia, there are more sensitive topics to touch, and it doesn't mean that we necessarily need to shy away, but we having a priority and knowing that we're going to focus on this first it's a great start to the story. It's a great start in the beginning. I think in terms of so it's Dan. Hey Dan, has also just shared on the chat. Another challenge on organizational level, the silence middle managers on the business side. They have big impact on the ground, but less vocal on DEI discussions. Yes, particularly important when we talking about DEI is that very often we'll hear from the vocal minorities. So from the vocal champions and from the sometimes the vocal resistors. But we often forget that there is a silent majority group that normally may not have such a clear view one way or another, or they sit somewhere in the middle, say, okay, I'm okay with this, maybe this one I'm not so sure, I'm not going to talk about. But it's important to just remember that the silent majority has a big role to play, and understanding a little bit more about what is their points of view and reaching out, making sure that we're speaking to that silent majority. All right. Thanks for sharing, folks. I'm going to keep going, but we're going to run back on some of these comments later on to further, especially from Reginald as well. Okay, so here, how can I navigate potential resistance? And you've already started talking about some of this, which is focusing on one aspect of DEI and keeping it localized and keeping it controllable. So first thing first, it's in every conversation that you're having with DEI, the one thing that's consistent is you are going to be there, right? You may not be speaking to the same person every time, but you're always going to be the one delivering the message. And the reason I say start with yourself is because when you start being vocal, when you start going out there and talking to people about DE&I, how you say how you say things and what you say is just as important as each other. And the reason I wanted to highlight with starting with yourself is recognizing and understanding what are you bringing to the conversation. Not just what you're bringing from a conscious perspective, but what you're bringing from an unconscious perspective. So even though I've been working in this space for a while now, I know I still have a lot of biases that I've grown up with. I've received a lot of messaging that I'm still working through, and sometimes when I'm consciously, the ones I'm very conscious about, it's great. But there may be some that I'm very unconscious about that still leaks through in my behavior, and it shows in the way sometimes that who I gravitate towards in a conversation or in a room. And the reason I think it's very important for us to be aware of this is because people are going to notice this as well. So what I wanted to highlight with this was really understanding where you sit and understanding what privileges and what advantages particularly you carry with you into some of these conversations that may make it easier for you to talk about some things that other people can't. So if I were to use myself as an example, under this wheel on the left-hand side, so I come from Malaysia. I'm Malaysian Chinese background. I come from a well-off family that was well off enough to send me overseas to study, for example. So that means I didn't have to overly concern myself with making sure I got good grades, good enough to be able to qualify myself for a scholarship, for example. So what's that mean? I also primarily speak English. It was important to my parents at the time that they felt English was the primary language that would have given us more advantages. I'm sure they now regret not focusing on Mandarin as much as they felt they should. But that also means, going overseas to study at the time and being a strong English speaker, coming back to when I was applying for jobs in KL, graduate jobs especially, that already put me into a group that was, I want to say, more preferable possibly for people, for high recruiters as well. And I think because then I moved into a space where I was then doing graduate recruitment, when I started looking at recruiting people for our graduate programs in a bank at the time, that also shaped how I thought, like, okay, I'm comfortable speaking in this group. I believe that there's a lot of talent to be found in this group. I started focusing on first finding students from that group. And that was, I'd say, I missed out on a really broad talent pool that comes from local universities in Malaysia. And that came from, and maybe that just didn't necessarily express themselves as well, perform as well as interviews when it comes to answering questions. But when you dug into the assessment centers and the behaviors they were produced, they kind of knocked it out of the park. So I want to say, just more of an example to be aware of, where is it that I've had it more supported, maybe an advantage going into situations and being able to express myself with more credibility, and where in some cases I haven't been able to access rooms or access conversations. So part of it's also, so I am from the LGBTQ community, for example, so how does that then influence the way that I feel I'm able to reach out to and connect with my colleagues as well, and how some of these things are going to influence the power dynamics when I have a conversation about things. Am I viewed to have credibility when I speak about a certain topic, or am I going to be mindful I'm missing out some things? So for example, now being in Hong Kong, I'm Chinese, I look Chinese. I don't necessarily speak Cantonese very well, but it means that I can still easily blend into the local culture. When I walk into the office and I'm dressed down, no one stops me. No one thinks that I'm anything other than coming into the office. Whereas I may have colleagues of South Asian background, and they very consciously tell me they have to dress up. Otherwise, they may be mistaken as someone who's here to deliver food, for example. So just important to, I want to say, that was something I hadn't necessarily realized, but after the conversation, it made me much more conscious about, okay, there are going to be experiences that I'm having an easy time going through, but people don't. And I need to be aware of that when I'm talking about a topic like DE&I, because I can't be seen to then promote all these values. And then if I go and do something that's, biased or that's discriminatory towards someone else, or has just given someone else a hard time for something they had no control over, that doesn't resonate very well. And I lose all forms of credibility in that aspect. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that it's really important to start with understanding where you are, understanding and how that shows up in how you speak to people and what could be missing from the conversation. Now, okay, so the second image here is just meant to say self-awareness, all right? And the one over here is very important. It's knowing your why. When you start talking about DE&I and start working on DE&I, you're going to run into, I'm sure, a lot of setbacks. And sometimes knowing your why is going to help you get through those setbacks, but also it's going to help you prioritize when you've received the setback or when you don't have enough resources to push through with something. And most importantly, it's instrumental to your storytelling. And I want to say, really build out a script that is personal and authentic to yourself, because storytelling is the best form of connecting with somebody on a personal level and getting their support. And knowing your why is going to make it easier for you to communicate and have more confidence in why you're doing what you're doing. And most importantly, also have it in your own language. So in the beginning, if you want to use what we put out there in policies, when we say we want to build a diverse workforce that's representative and where everyone can come and feel like they belong, that's great. But the more you get personal about it, and the more you're able to bring your own personal examples or your personal experiences to it, the more authentic it feels to the person that you're speaking to and that's trying to connect with it. Okay, I'm just going to double check to see if there's been any additional comments during this time. Okay, now, not yet. I also do want to say, if anybody wanted to share as to what what's their purpose around DEI, why they believe it's important for themselves. Feel free to put it down in the group chat or to unmute if you wanted to share that as well. Actually, if I can, Rita, is it okay if I call on you to ask why? What's your why?
Oh, actually, thanks for asking. My why is I really want to do something for the society. That's why we are for Asia HR Women Club. Right? Our focus is on DE&I. We love to promote this inclusive culture into organizations. So that's why we have webinars. That's why we take action by having webinars, by inviting experts to talk on this topic with their advice, and also with the for answering some of the queries. They're able to make an effort, see the value, and then promote it within the organization. So my why is to add value to the organization and also to the society as a whole. Of course, while we are doing it, we also create positive impact to those sort of silent majority or silent minority. Right? So this is my why.
Thanks, Rita, for sharing. Whilst I'm here, is it okay if Dan, if you're there, do you mind sharing what's your why? Can you type? Of course you can.
Sorry, I'm kind of outside, so I'm not turning on my camera. I think my why is that I believe everyone should have the freedom to be and create, and they should feel that they have the agency to make the world a better place. When I was growing up, I don't feel like I have a sense of that. So my why is that I want to enable other people to be able to do that, so they don't have to repeat my experience and feeling like of agency when I was younger.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Dan. I like what Dan touched on in terms of doing this so other people don't have to go through it. That's a powerful script to use, particularly when it comes to speaking with senior leaders, especially groups. I found it particularly helpful when I've in talent management conversations, succession planning conversations, and you're speaking with leaders in a room, and sometimes you hear leaders say, I've had a situation where I had one of the female leaders say, she says she's not mobile, so she won't move to take on bigger roles, or she's not able to move on to take on developmental roles so that she could be promoted. And they went on to say that, I made the choice to do so, knowing that I had to choose between this and family. I decided to go ahead and let my family know that I was going to do it. But I did it because that's how I was going to advance, and that was how I was going to grow professionally. And I think it's important just to remember that just because I may have done it that way and I had to fight that battle, it doesn't mean that I should continue. It doesn't decrease the value of what I've gone through, but is there a way that I can now open doors so someone else doesn't have to fight the same battle anymore, and we can move on from that? So that's one example where I found that script to be very helpful. What Rita mentioned about giving back to society and connecting it back to the community, I think that's particularly relevant that we could use when we talk about organizationally, how to link it back to the company purpose, and how DEI plays a role in that company's purpose, whether or not it's, for example, identifying underserved customers, and then from there spotting a business opportunity that may be helpful, but also because it helps, it helps people feel good about where they're working as well, and also personal development opportunities available to them through doing so. So I'll just share real quickly about my own why as well, which would be, so I'm from the LGBTQ community, and growing up in Malaysia, then I had parents who were in politics at the time actively. So one of the things I was always very mindful of growing up was that they would always impress upon me, like, you know, you got to be careful about what you do. You need to think about your reputation and everything else. So because they were so image focused, a lot of times coming from small city, it was, okay, so I can't really do anything that's going to be seen to be jeopardizing your career, for example. So, but I think I was also in a positive space because at least I knew that once I finished high school or finished SPM, as we call it, I would then be able to, I knew I was going to go to an overseas university. And once I went overseas, I was away from my family, then I could then explore that part of myself, if you will, and get to know the community that way. So I think because I was in a position to be able to do that, and when I did go overseas and meet other LGBTQ people, it became, I was all the way out and I was all the way in the closet until that. And when I left, then I came out of the closet and I was able to, I'd say, connect and explore that part of myself. One of the things that I found very helpful was like other Malaysians, Singaporeans, other Southeast Asians who were my classmates or my schoolmates or university mates that I got to know, who were out there just living life as themselves. And I found that I found that inspiring to just watch and learn and role model from that. But I think one thing I noticed was, after graduation, everyone's starting to think about, oh, now we need to look for a job. These same individuals would then also start acting differently. And they're like, oh, you can't have short hair anymore when you start preparing for the work. You have to start growing out your hair, or you have to start dressing differently as well. And I think for me, watching them do that felt quite sad, because these were the people who I thought who kind of helped show me what it was like to be, and help me discover these parts of myself and understand that part of myself better. And watching them have to do that was not something that made me feel good. And I also made the decision that I wasn't going to do the same thing. So therefore, what could I do that could then hopefully help them see that you don't necessarily have to go back into the closet. Now that you're graduating, going into the workforce, you can still continue to be hopefully out in the workplace, because that's got a lot of mental health benefits for you, provided you're in a space that's safe to do so. But that would be my why. Okay. Oh, thanks, Sue. You've got to run. That's okay. All right. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to move us on. Okay. So dealing with resistance when working with someone else. So one thing I wanted these are just some principles to keep in mind. One is that when you start working on DEI, some people are not going to like you just because of that, right? It's nothing to do with you personally, but this topic may frighten them. And then they may react to you because that's what you're representing. You're representing change in a way that's uncomfortable for them. So they may not, they may be difficult to work with as stakeholders. And sometimes they may be personal attacks, but it's just important for our own mental health to recognize that a lot of the times they are reacting to what you represent, and they're not reacting to you as a person. So just to depersonalize that, resistance is important. Another one is, and the reason why I asked you to think about your why is because it helps us use language that is easily understood. DEI has a lot of jargons that require explanation when you talk about equality, equity, what's the difference in some of these concepts, especially if we're working in a place that English is not the primary language, and we need to think about how do we localize that content further. Even more important that we use daily, easily understood language. Oh, okay. So third one, humanize each other. So also going back to why storytelling is important, it helps them see you as an individual beyond the jargon, and also helps you understand what is the insecurity or the fears that they may be dealing with the topic. And once you're able to understand and find out what that is, being able to then work with them through that fear, or to clarify, like there's no reason to clarify whatever if it's a fear of losing out, or if it's a fear of not being able to please everybody or getting it wrong. Fourth one, sorry, I've got here is it's always important to be able to assess whether the situation that you're dealing with the person is it comfortable, or is it uncomfortable? Is it safe or is it unsafe? Or is it ethical or unethical? It's possible that a situation, then a conversation, it may be all these things at once, or sometimes it may be uncomfortable, but it's still safe. So therefore, recognizing and assessing the situation that you're in, being able to then respond to that situation appropriately from that. So if it's uncomfortable for the person, or if it's uncomfortable for you, that's great. Sit with it, because that is something there for both for each of you to learn, and working through that uncomfortable. So if it's just uncomfortable but it's safe, let the learning happen and stick with it and just work through the discomfort. If it is unsafe, chances if it's unsafe, it's definitely going to be uncomfortable. And if it's unsafe, then you need to make a decision whether or not do you want to recognizing this needs to be changed and challenged. But in this moment, is it appropriate for you to is it appropriate for you to challenge in this moment? And if you have a strong relationship with the other person and you feel that it is okay to take the risk to challenge, then definitely call out and do so. If not, or you need more information, then it's okay. Just go back and re-strategize and think about how to approach this from another angle or at another time. The last one is compassion. So that's, again, very important, because compassion helps it feel safe for somebody else. Even if you're trying to deliver difficult feedback to someone, say you're working with a leader that may have said something inappropriate or a microaggression in a public setting, how do you go back and speak to that leader and call them out and point that out to them and work with them through it? We don't go in with guns blazing and say, oh, you've gone ahead and you've gone and upset everybody, or you've just insulted everybody. It's important to remember that a lot of times we don't know what people have on their plate, especially as leaders. All the sort of pressures or prioritizations they may be forced to manage at the time. But always remember that everyone is hurting in some way. Compassion will help us deliver the message in a safe way for the person, and therefore making it safe for yourself as well. Okay, I'm gonna move on now. Potential scripts to dismantle arguments. So some of you may have already come across this. One example I've put, so I've listed 4 examples here. So the first one here, inclusion, when well designed, it benefits everybody. And this is most often when it comes to technology. I've put down some examples here. So if everyone's familiar with US and their SAT as well, they have a policy where students can retake their SATs however many times they need to, and you just take the strongest score that you have. That policy came about because initially they had done research to indicate that girls, when going through their menstruation cycles, it has an impact on their SAT scores, significantly so. It doesn't mean that cognitive impairment is not, but if you've got, like, for those of us who've gone through a period, you do know in some cases it can be quite difficult and painful for people, and that may definitely impact our test performance and scores. So because they wanted to be able to provide opportunity for girls, they also used this policy and applied it more broadly. So boys also got to enjoy the benefits of that policy. Other examples here would be typewriters. So that was first invented by, I think it was an Italian person, and they were trying. It was for their friend who couldn't write, so they wanted to then invent a primitive form of a typewriter, so that then they could just type out letters rather than have to write. So those are just some examples. the uneven racetrack or starting point, so the equity conversation, that's helpful when it comes to addressing why people think, oh, why do you need to have a program for female leaders or young leaders, or why do you have to have a program for persons with disabilities? Shouldn't it be the same shouldn't this opportunity also be available to everybody else? But bringing in the equity conversation helps highlight the fact that certain groups face unique challenges, or more face unique challenges and have uneven starting points, and therefore for us to be able to access that talent pool more broadly, we need to provide certain level additional support, for example. Another one is separate DEI from politics. It's very much used, I want to say, especially on topics like whether or not it's LGBTQ, that's particularly more vulnerable to this, as a way to get votes, or if it's race-based conversations as well. Sometimes it's important to recognize that it muddles the conversation, but you should always separate DEI from politics to say that DEI is applicable in any situation, any form of governance. It doesn't matter if this is a fully run democracy. It doesn't matter if this is not fully run democracy. At the end of the day, all the principles that align to DEI, having diverse workplaces, having diverse opinions in a conversation helps you make better decisions. That's beneficial for any situation. So it's always important to remember to separate DEI from the politics. The last one here would say, especially to, I want to say, critics of like quotas, whether that's hiring quotas or quotas on the board. We need however X female women on the board, for example. It's here to say that quotas are just here to help us access a broader talent pool. It's made it more competitive. It actually means and it doesn't mean that we're settling for less, right? We're still looking for strong, qualified talent, but we are being more intentional and expanding what we mean by deserving talent, right? And how this may be expressed. So if anyone wanted to discuss some of these things a little bit further to your situation, we can do it separately offline. That's okay. I'm just mindful of the time. So I'm gonna, all right, organization-wide comms. Links us back to organizational purpose, business practices where possible, because this helps make it sustainable beyond just thinking about it as a people issue or as people management situations. Make sure you've got diverse representation of your champions or messengers. One thing that does arise sometimes is you hear, oh, okay, they only focus on gender, they don't focus on this, or they only focus on this, they don't care about this. And in that situation, we know we have limited resources. It's okay, but thinking about the intersectionality of it and trying to ensure we have as diverse representation as we can in Buchanan programs. Be very intentional to watch out for that where you can. Use everyday language. Transparency is important. Expect mistakes and expect feedback. So don't expect perfection from ourselves at this stage. It's an evolving topic and it will always continue to evolve. Side note, always check in with your organizational leader. What is the appetite for the pace of change, especially when it comes to organization-wide? Sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot if we overpromise and also under-deliver at this point in time. So just always make sure to double check and have a structured plan so you know what you're expecting. Okay. Sorry, I know that definitely went over time. I wanted to see if there's any comments or questions from the group.
I think Luri, if you don't mind, you can just unmute yourself and then let us know your question, because she texted me saying that she's not able to write her question on the Q&A box. Oh, Luri? Nuru, right? Nuru? Lulu, you there? Maybe just unmute yourself and then let us know your question so that your question will be answered. Lulu, you there? Okay, so no issues at all. Actually, Steph, I have a question here. I have a very practical question here. Well, as I shared with you earlier my why, right? I'm an advocate of DEI. So from time to time, I received messages from the Labor Department in Hong Kong asking us to hire disabled people. Okay, so for me, I have no issues on that. However, for the managers, right? This is something because we have never hired any disabled people. So how do I extend it to our managers so that they feel that, oh, okay, this is something that they should do, or something that they would do? What would be your advice?
Oh, okay. Thanks for asking that, Rita. I've had experiences with person with disabilities hiring programs in the past. It does, and I want to say this is one of those aspects where growing up I didn't have a lot of interaction with persons with disabilities. So I recognize that I have discomfort with this group, and not in a bad way, but in a way to say that when I'm with them, sometimes I'm not sure. I overthink, like, oh, what should I be doing? How can I be supporting them? And it makes me freeze up. It makes me overthink and overstress it. And sometimes my reaction to that is to try to avoid this topic entirely. So I do want to recognize that. So what initially I did when I was looking to hire interns, I purposely went to look for an intern with this background, because the reason I did so was because one, it's almost a softer step in, because when I was looking at hiring intern, it's on a short term and not a long term basis. It was also more manageable, I think, on the topic itself, because I think when I put myself through it first, so then other leaders and other people could see me working with this intern and have that visibility in the office space for them to then go around, connect, meet other leaders as well, and give that exposure to other leaders to say, okay, this is what it looks like having someone with a disability working in our space. And also allowed me to sense check and understand what sort of infrastructure was missing that I needed to first put in place so that it will make it easier for them to work in the office, versus I think going full in with all right, I'm now committing to 10 hires on a permanent basis with this leader. If you have a leader who already is very familiar with this group, that makes your life a lot easier, Rita. But if you haven't, then it may be good for you to first test it out with yourself or with your team. In terms of that, there are quite a few community groups. I think CARE is a good one to work with in terms of having access to the persons with disabilities pool, because they're also able to help advise and train the team that's going to be hosting the person on what to expect and what sort of accommodations may be required. So I'd say work with the community groups first, and if you can, if you already know that your office is accessible, great. If it's not, then I think definitely do the work on making sure the office is accessible, and by working with one of these groups to help you understand what you need to get done to make it so.